This is a D6 generation pip. Bite-sized content for a busy gamer. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ.
Hey, what about me?
Oh yeah, and sometimes featuring Rafe, Hollywood Granger.
D6G Hot Take.
Hello, and welcome back to one of my own little pips. Now, I do owe you an apology. I have tried to get other people on here, so you're not just listening to my voice. If you are still listening to my voice, sadly, that has all sort of fallen by the wayside with the closing out of the new year. Hopefully, I'll be able to put some things together in the new year. That's my hope. I certainly think my 2022, as far as my independent pips go, started a lot stronger than their ending. But anyway, I think I have something good for you today, especially if you're interested in historical gaming in particular. And so I'm just going to dive right in. So as you probably know, if you're still listening to this solo pip, I am planning or hoping on leading a tour of the eastern side of the Civil War, American Civil War battlefields, Gettysburg in particular, for Geek Nation Tours, with Geek Nation Tours in July of 2023. What that would entail is that I will be sort of like the nonstop entertainment portion of the trip, sort of corralling everybody, making sure they get where they need to go, making sure we make the restaurants on time, making sure we make the museums and whatnot, but also at the same time, always being available to chat and talk about the various things that we're seeing. And I know, having watched very, very good people do this for the last 36 years of my life, I don't want to go into this not knowing, as much as I can gather about the topic. So I've been reading some books, I've been watching movies, I've been on websites about the American Civil War. I've learned a lot. I've actually incorporated a lot of it into the civil rights unit that I teach in my English class when we read Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Pattillo Beals, an excellent book that I would recommend to everyone about the Little Rock Nine. And I start by giving an overview of the civil rights movement. And I've always talked a little bit about the Civil War when I did that, but this year it was a lot more informed. So I'm hoping that this goes. There's still a few slots left open before we can start like sort of locking everything in place. The way these tours work, remember, is that every tour participant gets to take part in choosing where we go and what we do and the kind of food that we're looking at and the kind of museums that we're going to and the kind of activities that we take part in. And I'm hoping that this all comes together, because that would be great. But I'm also hoping that I can kind of inject a little gaming into it. And so I've been looking at various options for gaming, in Civil War gaming in particular, obviously. And as you know, if you're still listening to my voice, you've probably listened to the show for quite a while. Russ and I in particular aren't really historical war gamers. We've dipped our toes in from time to time you could make, I guess, an argument about the pirate games that we've played being a little historical. We, of course, did a lot of Flames of War about 10 years ago now, maybe. I don't know if Russ did. No, I think he did. Yeah. Yeah, I think he had a German army. I had a British army, and of course, Rafe still plays it. And so I was interested in looking into miniatures game. Now, I have to admit that I have sort of, this is also, it could also serve as a psychological treatise on how a gamer gets into a new game. I've had my eye on Black Powder by Warlord Games for probably a couple years now, a few years now, and never pulled the trigger. Again, not really a huge fan of historical wargaming, but the scale of the game that just came out last year, Black Powder Epic Battles, is a 15 millimeter scale game. So you're talking the same scale as Flames of War, right? And you've got if anybody listening has ever played War Master, right? Wasn't it War Master? I think it was War Master. It was War Master. So, War Master was, I don't think it was 15 millimeter. I think it was more like 10 millimeter. But anyway, the models were on strips. There were, 10 or so models per strip. And so your units were, it was a much larger scale battle. So hundreds of models theoretically were taking place in these battles. And interestingly enough, those rules were written by Rick Priestley, and we actually had Rick Priestley on the show way back when, episode 185, I think, when we were talking about Beyond the Gates of Antares, which it was at that point, that was his latest game. And so War Master was this fantasy game that was played in the Warhammer fantasy universe, and the units were on these strips and they moved around, and it was very much a command and control game. You had commanders that would be giving orders to these units, and some orders would go and some orders wouldn't go, and some armies were really dependent upon these orders, and your units were much more elite and much more likely to accept their orders, and then other units not so much. And so it was a great game. It was actually one of the first boards that I built for the original DACA. Was a giant dwarven mountain fortress with a desert on one side and a coastal plain on the other. So you could play, the games could be played on smaller tables or a much larger table. And the goal was you could play on the coastal plain, you could play on the desert, or you could do some kind of big major battle. The mountain actually lifted up. There was the mountain was hollow inside with chambers and passageways that could actually accept these units in them, and a big giant feasting hall and towers. It was really, really kind of elaborate. I wish I had pictures of it. And so we did actually have huge mega battles where armies on either side were trying to take out to assault the Dwarven keep, or the Dwarven keep was trying to break out. We had all kinds of really cool stuff going on. So that scale has always sort of been intriguing to me. My very first wargaming experience ever at Norwich in college was Johnny Reb, which was a Civil War game that was played at roughly the same scale with those same strips, those same kinds of strips. So that is what Black Powder Epic is as far as scale is concerned, and that's kind of how they got me intrigued. And so looking into it because of the trip that's coming up, and I've always kind of, not always, but for years I've kind of had my eye on this kind of era for some reason, and the scale has always intrigued me. Very recently, it happens very insidiously. One minute, I'm just, minding my own business on the internet. And the next thing you know, my search bar is just full of gaming stuff for a game I don't own. And this at the same time with, I've got a ton of Crisis Protocol stuff that I just picked up for Black Friday. I've got a ton of Star Wars Legion stuff that I've just picked up on Black Friday. I've got a ton of terrain. It's just kind of crazy, and that I did manage to stick with it. If those of you who listened to the last pip I did know that I was hooked into the Mantic Games Kickstarter for their new Alien Forest and Battlefield Debris terrain Kickstarter, and I did stick with that. So I've got all of this 28/35 millimeter gaming stuff strewn all over the pub, and then I found a deal. Somebody must have had some overstock or something. Warlord Games currently, and I say currently because they're planning on redoing this whole line in December, and I'm recording this in December 2022. They currently have a Gettysburg starter set that is phenomenal. American Civil War Gettysburg starter set for Black Powder Epic Battles. That is a phenomenal deal. It has 24 regiments. That would be groups of, well, in this instance, they're groups of 5 of these units, and each unit has 20 15 millimeter men in it. 24 cannons, 24 commanders. So you can make a lot of changes to the commander, whip them up because you're going to need different things. But anyway, so that is generally going to run you, and they've got the rule book for Black Powder, the rule set, and they've got inside, they have the American Civil War supplement, and there's this cool 15 millimeter Civil War era barn by Sarissa Precision, who's one of the great companies that makes laser cut terrain. And there's a lot of battle flags, which are cool because that's kind of, one of the big draws. Anyway, so it's usually going to run you about $130 to $150 in a physical store or online, and I got it for $95. So how could I not? So I grabbed it. I've learned a lot since then. So quickly, a couple things that didn't really strike me as pro. So you've got, it's giant. You've got 12 basically regiments of each side, right? And one of them, they're color coded, they're dark blue plastic, and one of them is light gray plastic, and that's great. I didn't do any due diligence on these models. I assumed that the Confederates would look like Confederates and the Union would look Union. And what Warlord has actually done, which is pretty ingenious, although apparently it's driving historical wargamers insane online and has been since last year when it came out. They're the same sprues. And so your Union army is going to have a bunch of guys with, slouch hat / cowboy hat looking guys, as well as kepis, those little brimmed kind of boxy, almost baseball hat looking hats that they wear. So that's what the infantry are wearing. They're wearing a little bit of that, a little bit of the kepis, a little bit of the cowboy looking hats. The command is all the same. The cannon and the crew are all the same. So it's really going to, first of all, if that bothers you, this isn't going to be for you, because there's no historical accuracy really in the units as far as making them look like one side or the other. Uncle Thulu is a YouTuber who I've been following for a couple weeks now. He does great stuff, a lot of different stuff really, but he's really he's got a bunch of stuff focused on Black Powder Epic in particular and the American Civil War stuff. So he went through and he actually cut the little corners off, the sides off of the Union guys' slouch hats so they look like kepis and they look great. He also mentioned that apparently the Union soldiers weren't known for carrying their blanket rolls with them, but the Confederate soldiers did, and many of these models have the blanket rolls in them. So he painted, and he didn't really differentiate the blanket rolls on the Union troops. So if he did that, and they look great to me, they look great. They're fantastic to me. I'm perfectly content, especially the fact that the whole set contains over 1,200 15 millimeter models. When you get right down to it, it's kind of crazy. But that might turn people off. So the next thing that I learned that I didn't know, because like I said, I did no due diligence whatsoever. So black powder is an era and model. Oh my God, I'm blanking on the term that we always use. It doesn't require specific models. You can use any models. It's agnostic. That's what it is. It's model agnostic. It covers everything from before the American Civil War right through past the American Revolutionary War, through the Napoleonic Wars, through a bunch of basically anywhere they were using black powder up through the late 19th century. You can use this rule set. It is a thick book. If I look at it, I'm seeing it's almost 200 pages, and over 100 of those are rules. So this is not a rules light. It comes across as a relatively light game, if I'm going to be honest, but it is not rules light. This is the first time in years that I've delved into a rule book like that. I'm used to, Atomic Mass Games and Fantasy Flight, where these miniature games have rule book pamphlets more like, and that is not what this is here. So they also, the epic side of things, where you're talking about the 15 millimeter, they went in two directions. There's a Napoleonic epic line of games and models and armies and things like that they have. And then there's the Civil War, and like I said, they're rebooting the Civil War. It looks like they're using the same general sprues for both. They're adding plastic cavalry skirmishers, zouaves, I think is how you'd pronounce that, and dismounted cavalry. So the new set is going to have these new plastic models. So that's kind of exciting, but I didn't really know when that was coming out. And like I said, I got a really good deal on this, and I didn't want to take a chance of losing that out. So because the new line has a Guts and Glory starter set, which is smaller armies. It's got the barn, it's got the snake fencing, which is cool. And then there's the new Gettysburg battle set, which is larger armies, but not as large as the current box set. That's a crazy 12 regiments of each is kind of crazy. But then it also has a regiment of the Zouaves for each side, a regiment of cavalry for each side, a regiment of dismounted cavalry for each side, and a regiment of skirmishers for each side. So it gives you a lot more variety. The pack I have is straight up infantry. So if I'm going to do something more elaborate, I'm going to have to find some cavalry somewhere. But the rules for everything are in this big black powder 2nd edition rule book. Okay. The next surprise I had was when I opened it and I discovered that the rules are by Rick Priestley and Jervis Johnson. Now, Rick Priestley and Jervis Johnson, they're sort of the guys behind Games Workshop from ages and ages ago. They left Games Workshop ages and ages ago now to do their own things, which included apparently black powder, which is exciting. but they have a very distinct way of writing their rules, which is not something that I've ever really been a fan of. So uh, I find their games enjoyable. I've played their games most of my adult gaming life, but the rules, the way the rules are written, and one of my big complaints from Games Workshop way back in the day was that the rules are sort of written in a fluffy kind of storytelling sort of way. So the rules and some narrative is all mixed in, and it's very, very hard to kind of parse out the rules. So it took a lot longer. The rules again are a little over 100 pages of rules. And then you get, and like I said, and that's era agnostic. And then the American Civil War supplement that you get with the starter is a very, very small, it's 26 pages. It's got a bunch of battles in it, so that's cool, with the orders of battle. So there's no point values. Apparently there are point values in another supplement that is currently out of print pretty much everywhere. That's called Glory Hallelujah, which is out of stock even at Warlord's website. But there are no point values in either Black Powder Rules or the Black Powder Epic Battles American Civil War supplement, because you're basically reenacting actual battles that occurred, and so the orders of battle, the armies that you're using, are actually going to be representative of the battles of the forces that actually met there. So the supplement includes 4 pages of additional rules or addendums to the Black Powder rules that kind of tailor them to the Civil War, or to the Civil War from the Black Powder rule set. So, how does this game work? I mean, I'm not going to be able to give an in-depth review of the whole thing, but it's like I said, it goes back to War Master in that it is predominantly a game of morale and command and control. So the basic building block of your armies is going to be a brigade. And in a brigade, you're going to have multiple regiments, and those might be cavalry, artillery regiments, or they might be cavalry or infantry regiments, or and again, the terminology is all pretty fast and loose. So if you're real history buff, you're probably cringing and twitching, but I apologize. So you're gonna have artillery batteries, infantry regiments, and cavalry regiments. And each one of those regiments is going to be of various sizes. I'm just going to stick to infantry kind of to get the idea across. A regular infantry regiment is going to be about 3 stands, although they recommend 5 stands, which is crazy because if you're playing on a 4x6 board and you have each of your regiments, when it's in line formation, is actually going to be a foot long at that point, which means you're only going to have 6 regiments on the whole. I mean, that's just crazy talk. So again, going back to Uncle Thulu on YouTube, his recommendation is to go with a regular sized regiment would have 3 stands, and you can have small regiments, tiny regiments, and large regiments. So that allows you to go from 1 stand is tiny, 2 stands is small, 3 stands is regular, and 4 stands would be large. And so you're going to have a certain number of regiments, and you have a commander. And the commander's job, once you've deployed on the field, is to give orders to the regiments under his command. You can give orders to individual regiments, or you can give orders to the brigade as a whole. Brigade order. A brigade order is going to go to everybody, and everybody has to do the same thing. And this is one thing that I really liked about this rule set, is that there's a bit of storytelling in that you have to explain to your opponent what the orders are, and then you roll command dice. And because we're talking about Jervis and Rick Priestley, they're rolling 2 dice on a leadership, basically, just like old school 40K. And if you make the roll, then the unit that you're ordering, or the whole brigade, if you're giving a brigade order, gets to make 1 move, because your movements, your orders are basically movements and reforms. So if you make the roll, you get 1 order. If you make it by 2 or 3, you get 2 orders. And if you best it by 4 or more, I believe, don't hold me to this, but you get 3 moves. So you could have some units moving, 1 move, or you could have some moving 3 moves. And what you have to do is tell your folks, so this regiment, I'm going to give this regiment an order. I want them to move up to this ridge and then form line. And you roll your order, and let's say you get 3, and that gives you plenty of movement, and then you've got an extra move. It takes a move action to reform. And in the Civil War rulebook, you're basically looking at marching columns, skirmishing, and line is the line formations, are the 3 formations you're going to be focusing on the most. So you want to march up in a column, although if you get caught, if you mess up your roll or you blunder, which is even worse, and you've got regiments, or even worse, entire brigades caught in marching columns, then there's all kinds of negatives that can happen to that. So you're going to, 1 brigade at a time, you're going to give all your orders. And once your commander for that brigade fails to give an order, he can't give any more orders. You move on to the next one. You also have a general, and the general really has to be within 12. Again, the black powder general rules are sort of focused on 28 millimeter, which is a little weird. And so the measurements are all for that. So they recommend for the 15 millimeter, you either have it or you go with centimeters. So the general has to be close to a brigade commander in order to use a special ability he has, which allows you to re-roll 1 command roll. And that's really the only effect the general is going to have in the battle. Although there are all kinds of additional rules in here for expanding on that. Because again, Jervis Johnson and Rick Priestley are storyteller gamers at heart. And so right off the bat, they're going to tell you, take what you like, throw anything else in the bin. You don't, roll a D4. This is not a tournament game set by any stretch of the imagination. So, so you're going to order all of your brigades 1 at a time. And once all of your brigades have made their moves or not, based on, how well you rolled, you're then going to measure and see if they've got any shots. And their shots are going to be rolling on everybody hits on a 4+, so it's dependent on how many with modifiers, how many dice you're going to roll. A regular sized regiment, and you fire by regiments now, and you have to fire at the closest model, as the closest unit to you, with some leeway in that you can ignore skirmishers, you can ignore tiny units, depending on if you're a cannon, you can ignore some things. So there's a lot of granularity in the rules. Again, so I went through and I underlined each actual rule and put a bullet point next to it. And it's just, there are some pages that are just dense with red ink, and then some pages where it's like 1 or 2 rules and the rest of it is like, but then you can, flip a coin because gentlemen in war, blah, blah, blah. So you're firing at the enemy. Let's just say you're going, infantry regiment against infantry regiment. A regular infantry regiment rolls 3 dice, so you're going to roll 3 dice. Each 4+ is a hit, and then it's very abstract. So what you then have you have saves, and the save is actually a morale save. So what you're doing to the enemy unit is not actually inflicting casualties per se, but you're hurting guys, you're killing guys, you're scaring guys. So it's framed as more of a morale issue. So you have a morale save, and your morale save in general is probably going to be, say, a 4+. So you get hit, say, 2 times, you roll your morale saves. Let's say you made 1, so you took 1 quote unquote casualty, and then you have to mark that on the regiment. Each regiment also has a stat that is oh god, I've lost track of everything. It's stamina, and that's how many casualties that regiment can take before it counts as shaken. And so any regular unit, it's got a 3 basically. So once you've taken 3 casualties, you have to keep track of the casualties, and of course they sell great looking casualty markers. Then you have to keep track of excess casualties over that, and you're stuck at 3 for the rest of the game. So for the rest of the game, you're going to be shaken, okay? Meaning now any additional casualties you have to be kept track of, and then you take a break test at the end of the turn. And the break test is going to indicate what happens to you. And there are all kinds of modifiers. Modifiers if you got hit by a cannon, modifiers if you got enfilade fire, like people are firing at you from the side or the back, modifiers if you're in hand-to-hand combat, modifiers depending upon what kind of troop you are, right? And so you roll on a table, and that table is going to tell you what happens to that regiment. In Black Powder, it's very unforgiving. It's 2 dice, and you're rolling and you're modifying it. And every casualty over your stamina that you've taken that turn is going to be a -1. So if you take a bunch of casualties, you're not going to roll well. On a 4 or less on that 2-die roll, that unit evaporates. It's just gone. The Civil War rules have a cool supplement to that, which is the whipped rule. So you aren't actually going to disappear, but your combat effectiveness is greatly reduced for the rest of the game. You're still going to be on the battlefield. You still have to be taken into consideration, but you count as broken, which is how you basically declare victory in the game. Once half of the regiments in a brigade is broken, that brigade is broken. Once half of the brigades in your army are broken, then your army is broken, and the game is generally over. Sometimes the rules say you can play one more round if there's a chance for you to break the other guy, his army also, in the hopes of kind of locking in a mutual destruction sort of scenario. But it's not like you're going to be taking stands away from those regiments. The regiment is there. It's 3 stands or 2 stands or 1 stand or 4 stands for the entire time it's on the table, until those men are defeated enough that they run away, or in the American Civil War, the supplement, they're whipped. Although a whipped unit can then be forced to leave the battlefield entirely, so that can happen. And that's basically the game in a tiny little nutshell. There's a lot of nuance. Like I said, there's a lot of rules for terrain. There's a lot of rules for being in buildings. There's a lot of rules. The hand-to-hand can be brutal. Not easy to charge into hand-to-hand. There's a penalty for giving that order, and the only way to get into hand-to-hand is to give a charge order as a move. So your brigade commander has to give that order. One more thing on brigade formulation, because everybody in a brigade order has to get the same order, quite often it seems, on YouTube anyway, that most brigades kind of like, you want to have some infantry and some artillery, basically. You want to then have your cavalry in a different brigade. And your commanders have their own move at the end of your turn. They get a very extensive, they have a very long range move. So you're basically repositioning them on the battlefield. And they can join units also to kind of give a little bolster to that unit. There are some other orders that they can give. They can give a rally order that takes away one of the casualties that you've taken, so you're not at that break point, you're not shaken, although you can only lose 2 of those casualties in that way. So once you've taken casualties, you're always going to have at least 1 casualty. And the whole game really is about this command mechanic and then trying to batter down these units so that they will then break, or in the case of the Civil War, they become whipped and then they're retreating. You're then kind of like going after whatever particular objectives that the game had. Maybe you're looking to hold a bridge or a hill or things like that. So I think it's interesting. It's going to look fantastic, although I am very intimidated with thinking about painting 1,200 infantry units before I add anything else. But I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued. I'm looking forward to it. I did already order from Callistra, which is another UK company, a few more command stands to make more, so I can split up the units that came in the starter and make more regiments out of them. You've got 12 giant regiments of 5 stands each. So if you're going to go with Uncle Thulu's plan of having a standard regiment be 3 stands each, that's going to give you a lot of extra stands, but you need command sprues to go with that. So I did that, and they make some great casualties also. And so I did that because the casualties aren't available yet. So that's where it stands. I haven't played it yet. I'm very happy, especially at $95, with the starter set that I got. But like I said, the new starter set that's coming out looks great too, although it does cost quite a bit more. The new starter set, which they're calling the Gettysburg Battle Set, is $190. But it comes with over 2,000 models, so it's you get a lot. You get a lot. They also they've got a partnership with Sarissa Precision, so they've got a lot of really neat buildings, and there's a whole slew of it's got to be a supplement coming up, because there's a whole slew of well, then I guess not. There's just 2. There's the Monitor and a generic ironclad. But there's boats. I haven't seen the rules for those yet, but there's just a lot of cool stuff on this. So I'm hoping that this trip goes, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to host a reenactment of Gettysburg, or one of the days of Gettysburg, with these rules. I do think that these are the rules I'll go with. I was looking into a bunch of other rules, including Johnny Reb, which, remember, 36 years ago, that was where I started with this whole wacky hobby. But I think I'm going to go with this because, it's going to travel easily. These tiny models are going to travel easily. And I think I can get the local guys to play some of these games with me too. I hope so. It's going to look great. I will tell you that. I'm very excited. I mean, I've got to put the time in. Obviously, there's a lot of models, but I'm intrigued. And then of course, we'll see what happens from there. But I will keep up with this, and I'll let you know what's going on. And that's it for now. That is my hot take. My hot take is I think this is pretty cool. How did I get here? He who doesn't really like historical wargaming, really, I honestly have no idea. Maybe it was just that while I was injured and unable to do much, I didn't spend any of my hobby money, and it accrued and it reached a critical mass. I don't know. That could be it also. But look for some pictures of this stuff, hopefully soon, and I'll keep you posted. So thank you for listening, and good night.
And that was a D6G Hot Take.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode.
the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.